Once upon a time, the only people who bought cross-country four-wheel drive vehicles were farmers, but that's not true anymore. Today, there is a familiar sight on the King's Road in Chelsea, as they are on the Fen outside King's Lynn. There are normally reckoned to be about 12 makers, and we've got all of those here today. They range from the Dacia from Romania, costing just under £6,000, to the Lamborghini from Italy, 450 horsepower, costing £82,000. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to drive them both on and off the road. And we've got a test track here in central Norfolk, which after overnight rain is very slippery indeed. So the conditions for these vehicles are going to be very tough indeed. My enthusiasm for four-wheel drive vehicles is equalled only by my inexperience and lack of skill. But I was fascinated to try all 12 machines in these difficult conditions. For a more professional view, we had asked Peter Jones, who's both deputy editor and motoring correspondent of Farmers Weekly, to come along. We split the cars up into groups. Well, Peter, we'll start at the low end of the market here and with the Dacia Duster. What do you reckon?
It's very good at the cheap end of the market. You get what you pay for in all these things. It's Romanian, 1.4cc Renault-derived engine.
Yeah.
And inside, not a bad attempt at comfort, but it is a little bit Spartan.
It's pretty basic, and the door feels a bit tinny when you open it.
Indeed, but again, you're getting what you pay for.
Yeah.
It drives very well. It doesn't do badly across country at all because it's got independent front suspension and it's got coils on the back here. And while it gives you a little bit of bumpy road, it's not very good when it comes to braking, unfortunately. Brakes are very spongy and I don't like them at all.
Now, this next-door neighbour is also suitably red because it also comes from a communist country.
Indeed it does. Russia, Fiat derivative, but it's a Russian machine. And again, down at the cheap end of the market, but this has got coil springs all round and permanent four-wheel drive.
So you've probably got a more comfy ride than on the Dacia.
Indeed you have. And it was a left-hand drive vehicle, of course, and they had to convert it to right-hand drive so that the driver gets a more cramped foot position than the passenger on the other side.
It's really a saloon, isn't it, rather than the van-type cross-country jobs that we've been looking at.
They've tried to compromise here, but easily washed out. You could hose this down quite easily.
Yeah. I think I'd take the Dacia over this.
Well,
I have to choose.
Yes, certainly on the road, this ride's better than the Dacia.
Now, let's go and look at the first of our Japanese ones, the Suzuki.
Mm-hmm.
Garish colours.
Indeed.
What's it like to drive? What did you've had it on the road this morning?
Went out on the road this morning. Surprisingly good because it's got leaf springs, but it does ride reasonably well until you get up to high speeds, of course. As soon as you get up to 50 or 60 miles an hour, you'll get a lot of pitching. But it drives very well, and it's one of the most popular ones for the urbanites, if you like, that end of the market.
Very small in the back, though. I mean, look at this. This is amazing. I've never seen a spare wheel occupying that sort of space.
No, you can stick that on the back, and you can get another set of seats. But if you imagine another set of seats along the back here, you've got what? You wouldn't even get a decent Labrador in, would you?
But now, isn't this the one that all the fuss was made about, that it turns over at 20 miles an hour in certain conditions?
Yes, well, I'm not at all sure. You'll turn over any of these vehicles if you go about driving in the wrong way. There's no problem in doing that. So perhaps that criticism is a little unfair.
All three cars in the low-price category performed amazingly well. I began to wonder if perhaps there wasn't more to this off-road driving than I'd first assumed. I sought advice from the professionals in the shape of Neil Hopkinson and his partner, who run an off-road driving school in Warwickshire. He took me over some of the more fearsome parts of the course. I began by asking about the choice of tyres for these conditions.
Tyres are very, very important, because if you've got the wrong tyres, you're going to struggle for grip. Now, this Range Rover's got road tyres on, which means there are places where you will struggle for grip, but if you drive it properly and just help the tyres, you'll be surprised where you can go. Now, I went down there in first gear, in the bottom into second, and then here I'll just use a few revs, not too many, just enough just to help the Range Rover over, and then at the top, into first gear for the bottom, down, into second, a few revs just to help it up the hill. One thing you mustn't do is go mad, and when you get to the top, you take the revs off, into first gear, down the hill again, in first, feet off everything, because if you start braking, you slide.
You're not using your brakes at all?
No, the only time I use my brakes across country is if I fail a climb, which I'll do actually on this other hill. So what we do, we go up, and if I take my foot off, the vehicle's stalled.
Yeah.
Now, it'll stay here all day.
Yeah.
Like this. Now, how we get off here is I brake very, very hard, as though my life depends on it.
Yes.
D-clutch, Range Rover into reverse gear, off the clutch, gently off the brake, just to check that we are in reverse gear.
Yeah.
And the next thing I do is have the hand on top of the steering wheel, check that everything's okay, and just flick the key.
Yeah.
And it'll come off the hill.
What would have happened if you'd have done what I would have done, which is start the car normally? What would have happened then?
Well, as you went to go into reverse gear, you'd have 1 or 2 seconds where you weren't in control.
Right.
And if it was very, very slippery, you'd slide off down the hill.
I see.
And you might not be able to get reverse gear. And I'll go back into second gear, and now we use more revs and just go up the hill.
Now we've got the river. This was the most spectacular to watch as a spectator. What are you going to do now?
Well, we've already assessed the river, we've looked at it and decided it's okay.
Yeah.
But when we go down into the river, we've got a steep hill, so we'll go down in first low, so we've got complete control. And as we go into the river, I'll change to second low, and then I'll build up a bow wave. So we're in first low, so we go down into the river, first low, swing the wheel around to get ourselves in the right place.
Good slope there.
Into the river in second.
Yeah.
And stay over to the...
How deep are we?
I think we're half at the doors at one plate.
Well, it's not coming in the doors. We're not allowed to bail out.
Oh, no, they're sealed. But I have done in the past in old Land Rovers, Series 1s, where my wife and I have gone to feed the cows. We've had water up to our knees almost, where we've gone through a river.
But now you've got a diesel engine here. If this were a petrol engine, you'd have more problems, wouldn't you?
No, because what I would do was exactly the same as I'm doing now, build up a bow wave, and I still have that depression there.
Yes.
There is the danger that I would get water on the electrics, but if I did it properly and prepared the vehicle for that, then I wouldn't have a problem. Now up here, out, I'll have to use more power just to give myself just enough momentum just to come out. There we are, look.
Very
Take
good.
the power off, and we're there.
Meanwhile, the star of the show was right on our heels. £82,000 worth of machinery. In part 2, we look at the most luxurious, the most powerful, and the most pointless four-wheel drive on the market today. We'll also drive the more affordable models too.
Across the East Anglian landscape moves the most powerful force in the region's agriculture. This force is ECF. ECF brings fertilizer to your land and protection to your crops, buys and sells your grain and pulses, and markets your livestock. ECF fuels your farm and keeps your machinery running. ECF supplies your seeds and provides animal feed and health care. Farmers across the region, ECF is working for you.
Introducing Chocomint, a rather chic chocolate drink from the Ovaltine chocolate collection. Chocomint from from the Ovaltine Chocolate Collection.
Day and night, something for everyone, kids and mums, dads alike. Thrills and twirls, water whirls, something for everyone, spoiled for choice. Restaurants, day and night, holiday, holiday. Every day, what a choice of where to stay. Value-packed holiday, gotta come back.
Get your Butlins Holiday Worlds brochure now. Call free on 0800 900 950.
As property prices level out, it's the buyer's turn to push for a better deal, especially on a bigger place. The Woolwich has the money to help you make that better deal now, and Woolwich Premier Mortgages to help make bigger loans more affordable. How do you feel about that? Anything's possible with the Woolwich.
Now look what you've done.
Soft, strong, and long, and lots and lots and lots. Hendrix.
Every schoolboy knows that Lamborghini builds some of the fastest and most glamorous sports cars in the world. But not many know that they also make the most powerful off-road machine. Designed originally as a military vehicle for the Arabian desert, it is not the sort of thing you'd see pulling a horse box at the local gymkhana. With a 5.7-litre V12 under the bonnet, which produces 450 horsepower, it has a top speed of 130 miles an hour. I found it reminiscent of a luxurious lorry, with its air conditioning, leather seats, and a gearbox which felt distinctly agricultural. Since its launch, over 400 of these Lamborghini LM002s have been sold in Europe alone, including half a dozen in Britain. The price of £82,000 isn't the only deterrent. When the 60-gallon fuel tank runs dry after 300 miles, it costs you £147 to fill it up at the pumps. But back to earth after pretending to be a millionaire. Peter Jones has made a study of 4x4s and had some useful hints on what to look out for.
It depends entirely on your own circumstances, not just the depth of your pocket or whether you're nationalistic about a particular model or not. You've got to put down a list of your specific requirements, not the list of vehicles. Start with what you want. How much off-road work are you going to do? How much on-road work are you going to do? How many kids have you got? How many dogs do you want to get in the back? That decides whether you want 2 doors or 4 doors.
A lot of these vehicles pretend they're dual purpose. You know, you can go out to the theatre with your wife and you can go through a mucky ploughed field. Is this realistic or is it sales talk?
No, so you can. And that brings up the other point of the lady drivers. If your wife is going to drive it a lot, she won't like some of the heavy steering and some of the heavy pedals on some models. You've got to decide which of those you're going to have based on more comfortable, easier driving.
Now, this Daihatsu is the beginning, isn't it, of the middle range of these cars?
Yes, and the lower end of the Daihatsu range. This is the hardtop. Very good farmer's car, very popular with farmers. They go up to an estate with a turbo diesel, but this has got the straight diesel in it.
It's the first diesel we've seen.
It is indeed.
But it still does look a wee bit like a pickup truck converted.
Yes, yes, but it's quite comfortable inside. It's surprisingly comfortable, in fact.
And it performed fairly well over the...
Indeed, it's got leaf springs, but very well damped, the leaf springs. It gives a surprisingly good ride.
And now next door to it, the Isuzu, which is slightly more luxurious, slightly more expensive. It's got these interesting doors at the back as well.
It has. These open one-third and two-thirds.
All right. Yes. Oh, there's a lot of room in here.
The seats,
yes,
of course, fold forward.
Yeah.
But it's a carpet floor,
Yeah.
but good carpet, and it would brush out quite easily if you get mud on it.
This is a 2 Labrador model, indeed a Great Dane model, possibly.
Yeah, indeed.
And inside, it's fairly luxurious. Well, let's go and look next door at the Patrol by Nissan. Again, this looks a little like a pickup truck that's been converted.
It is. It's a slab of a vehicle, but it's got a very good 6-cylinder engine in it. And it's indistinguished as a vehicle, but very capable nevertheless.
And the sort of space inside, probably rather less than the Isuzu we've just been looking at.
Slightly more cramped, as you can see, but a very good level of finish.
Yes. Oh, it's definitely getting comfortable once we get up to this level, isn't it?
Indeed.
And now we've got the Shogun, which I've always had a slight soft spot for. It's a sort of poor man's Range Rover, isn't it?
I agree, they do it very well.
I mean, for 14,500 quid, you can actually get 2 of these for the top of the range Range Rover.
You can, and for just a little more, you can get air conditioning and the complete works.
2.6-litre petrol engine, and it went quite well on the track when I was driving it this morning.
Or you can have one of the best and smoothest turbo diesels going.
To recap, the middle range so far had consisted of the Daihatsu, which produces no less than 3 different engine options and more than a dozen models. This one, the 4-track diesel hardtop, has a 2.8-litre engine. In its commercial guise, it came without rear seats or windows and cost £9,607 plus VAT. Looking somewhat similar, the Isuzu Trooper came next. Ours, costing £13,500, was a short wheelbase diesel with another 2.8-litre engine. But you can also buy a petrol model if you wish. The Nissan Patrol is, yet again, a Japanese model. Like the others in this group, it comes with either petrol or diesel engines, and this short wheelbase version costs just short of £14,000 on the road. And finally, the Mitsubishi Shogun. You can have it as short or long wheelbase, 2-door or 4, petrol or diesel. The one we had was petrol-powered and cost £15,239. The Japanese have long dominated this sector of the market, but recently import quotas have been introduced which might just give our next model a chance to make a comeback. The car which started it all 40 years ago, the Land Rover.
A vastly different machine. Of course, the undercarriage is very much now the same as the Range Rover, with coil spring and permanent 4-wheel drive.
And some of the chaps here were telling me that they're going to bring out a new Land Rover one of these days. They're all very sort of secretive and coy about it. Is this going to happen?
Yes, it's certainly on the drawing board now, and it should be out, well, within a year or 2.
Well, it can't be a moment too soon. Now we got the Toyota, the Land Cruiser.
Big, beefy, marvellous engine.
6-cylinder, isn't it?
6-cylinder.
Yeah.
But it's got a very big overhang at the back, and as we found here, it grounds very easily.
And yet this sells more across the world than any of these other vehicles, probably as much as all of them put together.
It's the world bestseller, and an excellent towing vehicle.
Yeah, and very comfy inside.
Exactly.
Toyota only import 2 of their models into the UK because of import restrictions. The GX here is easily the most expensive of the middle group, costing just over £18,500. This compares with the rather basic Land Rover 90 with its 2.5-litre diesel engine, which will set you back just under £15,000. Meanwhile, in the mud, a lot of drivers were getting into difficulties. So once again, I went back to the professionals to find out what were the most common mistakes.
A lot of braking, a lot of that's braking down a hill, wrong gear selection, too many revs, and people were thrashing up hills as though their life depended on it, when you only need to give the vehicle enough revs to balance traction and power.
Well, are you saying then that the driver's actually more important than the car itself?
I think so. I think the driver and tyres are the 2 most important things in off-road driving. Because all of these vehicles we've seen this morning, they'll do amazing things if you let them.
Well, we started with the very cheap ones in Europe, and we're going to finish here, Peter, aren't we, with the 2 most expensive ones, also European.
Indeed.
And this is the Mercedes which I must say I'm a little bit familiar with. I've been driving one for a long time now. Very Germanic, isn't it?
Yes, hard seats, well engineered, definitely a quality vehicle, no doubt about it.
Another example of German engineering, these two diff locks that you can engage separately.
Yes.
Front and back, it's very thorough.
But you'll notice they're sighted for the left-hand drive version,
Correct.
so you've got to reach over from this side to get to them.
And yet it's never really had the chic of the Range Rover, has it, this car?
Not quite.
It hasn't ever looked the part. And finally, there's the one they all try and beat.
The ultimate off-road vehicle, the Range Rover.
3.5-litre V8 petrol or diesel.
Turbo diesel. You can have a turbo diesel version, and you can have it with ordinary carburetors or injected. This is the injection version.
In the middle of the Range Rover models, the Vogue, with its 3.5-litre petrol V8, sells for £23,200. Its nearest competitor, the Mercedes diesel G-Wagon, which came in its short wheelbase version, retails for £21,600. Our brief look at these 12 machines had taken us 2 days, so we simply didn't have the time to do a detailed and objective assessment of each. Nevertheless, I was left with some very clear impressions as to how suitable they would be on the farm. But regardless of cost, I wondered which Peter Jones would have chosen.
No contest, really. I'd go for the Range Rover.
But if you were an impoverished journalist on a very small salary and you really had to mind your pennies, would your decision be any different?
I might not buy a four-wheel drive then. I might decide to hump it across country in gumboots. But really, to sum it all up, my requirements are different to everybody else's. There's probably something here which suits most people, depending on the priorities they've got on their list.
And for those of you who want more details, you can write to us at Farming Diary for a brochure we've prepared. Meanwhile, sales of 4x4s continue to boom as the public discovers what farmers have known for ages. They're fun.
For that free brochure on the vehicles featured, send an A4 stamped addressed envelope to Kathy Mason, Farming Diary, Anglia Television, Norwich, NR1